August 636, a river, two empires, and a single battle that rewired power across the eastern Mediterranean. This was Yarmouk, not merely a clash of armies, but a strategic rupture that turned the map of the Levant inside out. Today, we'll uncover the tactical and strategic secrets that made it a game-changer. The story begins before the river. For 3 decades, the great powers of the Near East had been exhausted. The Byzantine Empire and the Sassanian Persian state bled through wars that shifted borders and drained treasuries. Into that vacuum stepped a newly unified Arabian polity, energized by recent conquests and driven by commanders who prized mobility and cohesion. Between 634 and 636, Muslim forces moved rapidly across Syria and Palestine, taking fortified towns and forcing the Byzantines into a costly, reactive posture. Visual, timeline 602 through 636, map showing Byzantine Sassanian exhaustion and early Muslim advances. If you enjoy deep dives into military history, subscribe now to follow the series as we trace how one battle rewrote a region's destiny. By the summer of 636, the situation was stark. Emperor Heraclius had watched a domino fall. Border towns lost, supply lines threatened, local garrisons collapsing. In response, he concentrated what remained of imperial strength in the Levant. Facing him were Muslim armies under overall commanders such as Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, with Khalid ibn al-Walid acting as the primary battlefield tactician, a leader famed for rapid cavalry movements and flexible employment of forces. On the Byzantine side, field command fell to Vahan, supported by a multi-ethnic host: Byzantine provincials, Armenians, Ghassanid Ghanib auxiliaries, and units of heavy cavalry known to chroniclers as cataphracti. Visual, portraits with nameplates: Khalid ibn al-Walid, Abu Ubaidah, Heraclius, Vahan. Overlay, force composition icons. Understanding who faced whom is essential. The Byzantines were, in many accounts, numerically superior, though precise figures remain disputed and estimates vary widely. Their strength lay in heavy cavalry and masses of infantry formed from regional levies. The cataphracti were heavily armored horsemen, shock troops intended to break formations through weight and impact. They had the advantage in a set-piece engagement where armor and mass mattered. The Muslim armies were lighter, more mobile, and more homogeneous in command and purpose. Their cavalry moved quickly, skirmished effectively, and could be concentrated or dispersed with minimal friction. Morale and unity of command were not minor facts, they were tactical advantages. Visual, force disposition diagram. Note, estimates vary footnote. The armies met on the plains along the Yarmouk River in mid-August, roughly August 15, 636. Terrain mattered. Rolling plains hemmed by the river and high ground, limited crossing points, and narrow corridors that could be turned into traps. Both sides tested the other gently at first, probing attacks, cavalry skirmishes, and feints meant to find weakness. Day 1. The battle opened with reconnaissance and skirmishing. Light cavalry on both sides raced for favorable ground. Archers exchanged fire, and local commanders tested formations. The Byzantines pressed their wings, attempting to encircle the lighter Muslim center. The first day produced fierce clashes, but no decisive breakthrough. Both sides pulled back to reorganize. Day 2. Pressure increased on the flanks. Byzantine commanders sought to exploit their numerical advantage by binding the Muslim wings and then rolling up the center. Muslim units absorbed the pressure, trading space for cohesion. Khalid's role at this stage is important. He was mobile, ready to shift from one sector to another, and he kept a reserve of cavalry prepared to strike where the need was greatest. This flexibility prevented local collapses that might otherwise have allowed the Byzantines to exploit their numbers. Visual, animated arrows showing Byzantine wing pressure, Khalid's cavalry reserve moving between sectors. By day 3 and day 4, the battle settled into a grinding contest. The Byzantines tried repeated local concentrations to punch through. The Muslim defense relied on disciplined withdrawal, counterattacks, and quick exploitation of any exposed Byzantine flanks. Light cavalry skirmishes kept the heavier cataphracts from maneuvering freely. Their weight made them potent in a direct charge, but slower to respond to rapid changes. Where the Byzantines deployed their heavier formations effectively, they could push, but they found it hard to convert tactical pushes into operational encirclements. Historians emphasize that morale and cohesion matter as much as armor. The Byzantine force was multi-ethnic. Contingents spoke different languages, used different equipment, and came with varied local loyalties. When a battle becomes disorderly, coordination between such elements is difficult. The Muslim forces, by contrast, fought under a more unified command structure. Units moved in response to a smaller circle of authority. That unity reduced friction and enabled the rapid concentration of force at critical points. Day 5. Negotiations and a brief attempt at a truce have been reported by some sources. Other accounts suggest a temporary lull while each side rebuilt their strength. Whatever the case, Muslim commanders used the pause to prepare. They made a calculated decision. If escape and retreat routes could be constrained, then the Byzantine numerical advantage could be neutralized by localized weight of force. That meant controlling crossing points and denying the enemy room to maneuver. The decisive gamble centered on one tactical maneuver, a concentrated cavalry assault combined with the closure of a critical crossing. Khalid's cavalry units were massed and poised to strike where the Byzantines showed weakness. At the same time, Muslim detachments worked to close the routes that would allow the Byzantine army to withdraw intact or to regroup across the river. Bridge and ford control were not glamorous, but they were fatal to an army that depended on disciplined withdrawal when the tide turned. Day 6. The final day was short, brutal, and decisive. The Muslim cavalry launched a concentrated assault against weakened portions of the Byzantine line. Speed and shock, not armor alone, broke local cohesion. Simultaneously, the Byzantines found their escape routes constricted. Where previously numerical superiority had allowed them to trade space and fall back in order, the closure of crossings converted retreat into rout. Once formations began to break and detachments fled in different directions, the multi-ethnic nature of the Byzantine host magnified the collapse. A rout is contagious. When one wing crumbles, panic spreads. By the end of the 6th day, what had been a difficult stalemate turned into a rout for the Byzantines and a strategic collapse of their control over the region. Visual, animated envelopment and bridge closure. Sound design, rising tempo, then abrupt percussion to mark the rout. Casualty figures are contested. Ancient chronicles give differing accounts. Modern historians often offer ranges and caution. Most agree that Byzantine losses were heavy, and that the defeat destroyed their ability to resist effective control of Syria and Palestine. Muslim losses were substantial as well, but the strategic balance decisively shifted. The important point is less any single number and more the operational result. The Byzantine field army was no longer a coherent instrument for projecting force across the Levant. So what were the secrets, the tactical and strategic principles that turned Yarmouk into a game-changer? First, concentration of force at the decisive point. Where the Byzantines tried to spread their strength and leverage local superiority, Muslim commanders concentrated mobility and strikes precisely where they would break cohesion. This was not simply throwing more men at a spot. It was timing and focus, massing the right kind of force, cavalry, at the right moment. Second, mobility and flexibility. Heavy cavalry has shock value, but mobility allows commanders to shape the battlefield continuously. College reputation rests on moving fast, keeping reserves fluid, and exploiting fleeting weaknesses. Mobility also underpinned operational depth, the ability to threaten not just a front but an enemy's lines of retreat. Third, unity of command and morale. Cohesion matters when battles become chaotic. A unified command structure reduces the friction of communication and simplifies execution.
The Muslim forces demonstrated a higher degree of internal cohesion during the critical phases of Yarmouk, which translated into tactical advantage. Fourth, terrain and timing.
Controlling river crossings and high ground turned an otherwise balanced fight into a trap. The deliberate effort to deny escape routes transformed tactical setback for the Byzantines into strategic catastrophe. Timing the cavalry concentration to coincide with bridge denial multiplied the effect. Fifth, psychological impact and momentum. Warfare is often decided not by single blows, but by the spread of disorder. Once elements of the Byzantine field army began to rout, the multi-ethnic composition and the loss of coherent leadership in the field amplified collapse. Momentum, once seized, became decisive. These principles are not unique to the 7th century, but their application at Yarmouk produced consequences that were both immediate and long-term. In the short term, the Byzantine grip over Syria and Palestine collapsed. Cities and provinces that had been tenuously held now faced a new reality. The loss opened routes for subsequent Muslim campaigns into Egypt and later into North Africa. Strategically, the battle demonstrated that an agile, cohesive force could displace larger, multi-ethnic imperial armies when it concentrated mobility and denied the enemy room to maneuver. Longer-term implications extend into how historians view medieval warfare. Yarmouk became a template. Maneuver, concentration, and command unity could substitute for numbers and heavy equipment. The battle accelerated the strategic realignment of the Eastern Mediterranean. An exhausted Byzantine state found itself forced onto the defensive along new borders and with diminished capacity to project power. None of this implies a single miraculous cause or a simplistic moral about superiority. The victory depended on a confluence of factors: imperial exhaustion, competent leadership on the Muslim side, effective use of terrain, and the breakdown of Byzantine field cohesion under the strain of sustained, focused attacks. Many details remain debated. Sources disagree on exact troop strengths, casualty totals, and the fine-grained chronology of certain maneuvers. Where certainty is lacking, historians give ranges and note disputes. The larger picture, however, is clear. Yarmouk was decisive in breaking Byzantine control of the Levant and setting the stage for a new strategic order. Visual, map sequence showing post-Yarmouk Muslim conquests into Egypt and North Africa. Archival images, coins, period armor. Overlay, estimates vary. Footnote. In military terms, the lessons of Yarmouk remain instructive. Concentrate where it matters, move to exploit openings, hold command structures that can execute under pressure, and never underestimate the tactical value of denying your enemy escape and cohesion. Strategically, Yarmouk shows how the exhaustion of great powers creates openings for rapid change, and how a single well-executed engagement can have ripple effects across decades. August 636 was more than a date on a calendar. It was a moment when tactics met opportunity. The secrets were not mystical. They were practical choices: concentration, mobility, unity, terrain control, and timing, applied with skill. Those choices converted battlefield success into far-reaching geopolitical transformation. If you found this exploration helpful, like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into the pivotal battles that shaped history. Watch next for a closer look at Khalid ibn al-Walid's earlier campaigns and how they prepared the ground for Yarmouk.